count as a unmanned vehicle. Nobody in it, no humans. It's aerial for a while. It's a vehicle in the sense that there's more of a vessel, I guess. That starts with a V as well, because it's a vessel full of petrol.
You know, if you throw it from far enough away, I think you could. Need a good arm on you. Did you hear about Lavrov, the guy who looks like a shoe, going to Brazil? I'm sure we're all aware of it. However, he didn't entirely get the cheers and stuff that he was looking for. During Lavrov's visit, activists held a protest in front of the Russian consulate in Sao Paulo. They turned up with Ukrainian flags and appeals for the Russian Federation to get out of Ukraine. In fact, some of the posters that they were holding up proclaimed that Russia is a murderer, The Hague is waiting for you, and you are war criminals. So congratulations to those activists in Brazil for making sure that he's having an uncomfortable visit.
Well done. No, were these messages written on something wooden, maybe, or
sort of thing, you know, like you see at most sort of protests.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, what, he's been laughed at in, where was it? Did he go? Korea? Was it Korea?
I don't think they'd allow laughing at him there.
Well, that's it. But he got laughed at anyway somewhere for stating that Ukraine had invaded them, and now he's getting protests, which you know, just going around the world making friends and influencing people there with his shoe face.
But I have heard that Putin said that Russia has many friends around the world.
Yeah. What was it Nick said? They just go to a different school, so you don't know them, that sort of thing.
Or they're French.
Oh, I saw that knife.
Well, don't forget, he wants to sit back at the table with them, so it's interesting how much dirt, how much shit, how much crap, and how much blood this betrayer of the original shareholders of Le Monde and purveyor of nannies actually likes to have. Strange one.
Would you like to hear about another strange man?
Yes, please. Is it Ola?
Yes.
No, this is good old Dmitry Medvedev. He's
just cranky because he can't get his absolute vodka.
Oh yeah, indeed, he is very
He
cranky.
switched to Jameson,
well,
I heard.
Just doesn't sit right.
Thank you. So he has threatened to provide the latest Russian weapons to North Korea. So here's what he said. Now party is willing to help our enemies have emerged. South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol said that in principle, this stalemate is ready to supply weapons to the Kyiv regime. They love that, don't they? The Kyiv regime. What the F are they talking about? Anyway, this is considering that until recently, the South Koreans ardently assured that the possibility of supplying lethal weapons to Kyiv was completely ruled out. I wonder what the inhabitants of this country will say when they see the latest designs of Russian weapons from their closest neighbours. As they say, quid pro quo. Well, we've seen some of his latest Russian weapons. Have we seen the BMP-3 Bukhana? Anybody?
BMP-3, we've seen some BMP-3s over time. Not very many, but there's some around.
Yes, well, there's also these little sort of like extra armored up Scooby-Doo vans, which they've been painting recently. Maybe it's them they're talking about.
They're really good.
They look fabulous, don't they? I mean, just cracking for the war zone with their tiny little slit windows that you can't see out of, and they're what looks to be just one thin sheet of metal armor. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So one of these, and you will be familiar with Oryx, right? And Oryx keeps several lists. One of the lists is a list of Russian equipment not yet destroyed in Ukraine, and they just keep having to add to it because Russians keep making up more equipment. For example, today added to the list of things not yet destroyed is the ATS-59G artillery tractor with a 25mm 2M3 naval turret. You know, for as long as they'll just keep mixing and matching random things together, they'll never run out of new equipment. This is brand new equipment, never before seen.
Do you remember as a child having a game where you used to draw a head and then you'd fold the paper over and you'd pass it to somebody else and they'd draw a body and then they'd fold it over and pass it to someone else and they'd draw the legs and then you'd unfold it and see what you got? And it was usually quite amusing, you know, like dinosaur heads with people's bodies and like bare feet or something like that. Is this kind of what the Russians are doing? I'm going to say possibly.
I think they read the book, you know, and were like, "Ha, Chimera, that sounds like a great idea. How about?"
How about we just find some things and weld them together? Yeah. So someone got excited down the workshop, didn't they? Fabulous. Shaggy fella, please go ahead. I think the Scooby-Doo van brought you up, did it not?
It did indeed. It did indeed. We're talking about my wheelhouse now, or at least my steering wheel anyway. So I've been keeping a track of these, obviously. Well, hopefully, obviously. I'm up to eight distinct Scooby-Doo vans, or Shaggy-Doo vans, as I like to call them. All burnt out, unfortunately, apart from one. Doman gave me my 8th the other day, yesterday, I think it was. I lose track of time. I'm kind of on American time at the moment. Yeah, that one was being blessed, number 8. I hope it is in a burnt out state by now. So yeah, I'm kind of Shaggy Oryx, should we say, when it comes to Scooby-Doo vans, maybe. If you see any Scooby-Doo vans out there, people listening and speaking, send them over to me so I can add them to my little database.
Excellent work. I'm glad you're keeping tabs of them, especially that bright orange one that was being blessed. Do we reckon that's its new camouflage?
That is a Mark 3.5. So the windows were blacked out because of all the sensitive electronics in the in it. So it's got a brand new cassette player in there. I can't actually say. I can't say it's top secret. Top secret. Top secret.
Did you say you've gotten to 8?
I've gotten to 8.
Good, good.
I have either good news or bad news for you. I'm not sure which, but
You're
Oryx
gonna
has
say-
gotten to 43.
Well, that's Oryx, isn't he? He's just a show off. Yeah. I mean, I've got other more important things to do than sit there and count these things. Yeah. I mean, I've got to work for a living, for God's sake.
Shaggy, do you remember
which brings
Asterix and Obelix?
I do. French stripy panted people.
Exactly. You are from now on Shagorix.
Shagorix. Okay. Oh, mais oui, monsieur. I'm gonna have to try and figure out a French shaggy. Actually, that'd be quite amusing or disgusting. I'm not quite sure which. I'll give it a go anyway. A French accented shaggy Rogers.
The
That's
Normans,
funny.
the
Brilliant.
Normans and the Bretons in France are the ones to be trusted. Trust me.
Exactly. Have you been to the theme park? Probably not. Actually, I don't think
No,
I'll see you
I've
in there,
been to
actually.
Normandy, I've been to the Bretagne, and I've been to Basque, but I haven't been to a theme park of this kind. Did I miss something?
No, no. But I just had this visual of you walking around in the stripy outfit, just as a fancy dress party, wandering around there. So yeah, if I ever get married again, and I might have my bachelor party there, and I would invite you, and you will have to wear that costume. So.
I think it's pretty straightforward, Shaggy. You just, just like rugby clothes.
yeah, you do that. Anyway, I gotta get off. I gotta get back to work. So lovely speaking to you, and I'll drop down to listen.
I knew what would happen when I brought out the Scooby-Doo mobiles.
Well, I absolutely love them little vans because they're like totally the wrong thing to be flying around in. But they do go quite fast sometimes.
Not as fast as a MX-10 RC, which apparently now could go up to 120 kilometers an hour, which should be tremendous. It's what you need for baguette delivery.
Well, hopefully they run them in the right direction and not into one another.
Yeah, it'd be less good.
Yeah, I've seen so many memes about that turret being knocked off yesterday. My favourite one has got to be the little ERA dudes pointing at the underneath of it. We could put some there.
Put them all sorts of places. Bradleys are good for that. Very large surfaces. Lots of ERA can go there. But yeah, hashtag contact.
I believe Dr. Nick is coming to join us. Hello, Dr. Nick.
Hi. So, mockers, I need to see that meme because I didn't see that one. I saw so many of them, and I really love to see it because I love memes. I think my favorite one was those two pictures of the tanks, of the tank from different angles. And one of the ERA guys is yelling and has like a Polish flag on him. And then the other two are supposed to be, the Ukrainian tankers, and they've got their hands folded in front of them, looking all innocent. It's kind of funny. But anyway, if you wouldn't mind sharing that one again or sending it to me, because I'm collecting memes for academic purposes, always, only, of course. But what did happen, because I've been so busy doing other things, did they determine what happened? I saw some speculation that it was two tanks running into each other, perhaps. Do we know what occurred with that? Why the little thing popped off?
The best explanation I've seen is that one tank reversed instead of went forward, and reversed up over and into and over the tank behind it. And part of the explanation is that Soviet designed tanks can go backwards with a maximum speed of about 4 kilometers an hour, whereas Western tanks can go backwards with a speed of closer to 30 kilometers an hour, about 20 miles, close to 20 miles an hour, 15 to 20 miles an hour. And it simply wasn't expected. So that's a good lesson learned.
Yeah.
And it's a shame, but I'm sure that they can fix it eventually, and they can take a different one in the meantime.
Yes. That does make sense, and it's hilarious, but also disappointing at the same time. But yeah, that was my thought. That so long as the turret didn't come off because it went floaty, because somebody shot a missile at it or something like this, then it should be fine. Relatively speaking, that it could be towed back someplace where they could reattach the turret or however it needs to occur. But I had a good giggle out of the memes that came out of that one yesterday too. But yeah, so that makes sense, Doman. Thanks for updating me on that. I am in a dead Am I in a dead spot and is nobody speaking, or is it just?
Nope,
No.
you're good. We're just waiting for what Colonel Jeff will indicate to us that the interview is about to start. Sorry.
Oh, okay, no problem, no problem. Oh yeah, 1 o'clock. Gotcha.
And because we're extra juggling things now, we're not sure exactly how it's progressing. So, Colonel, if you want to give us some sort of an indication, we'd be very glad for one. But we also know that you might not be able to give one in this moment.
I think that's your answer, Doman, at the moment.
Yep,
Give them a moment.
and then I guess in the meantime, while we're waiting for the Colonel, I'll just note that there was an image that came out with some Bradleys and some M55S tanks. And M55 is a Slovenian T55 that was heavily upgraded by Israelis in the early 2000s. And the tanks are about a third of the size of the Bradleys, maybe half the size of the Bradleys. They look really tiny next to the Bradleys, and almost kind of unnecessary.
Well, Dr. Nick's been waiting to see Bradley's in Ukraine, so I hope this is making her very happy.
Yeah, some came out yesterday that were 2 days ago that were pixelated already.
Yes, that made me super, super excited. I just can't wait to see them in action next. I want to see some of that sweet, sweet Bradley footage. You know.
Exactly, because you know what it means when they're seen in action.
Hey, Doman.
It means they're blowing up Ruskies. Anyway, go ahead.
And it means there will be hundreds more coming. And I think we are ready for an interview.
All right, Doman. So, hey, big news. Colonel retired Ray Wojcik, who shared some exceptional insights on military perspective today in a special episode, which we normally don't do on Wednesday, but that's all right, man, because we got a rock star guest. Dan Two Dogs Hampton is with us, and he's probably what many are claiming to be the most decorated aviator in the U.S. military since Vietnam. Before we get to Dan, though, a few big announcements. My third book released yesterday, Afghan Ghost, which is rocking in sales. From that book are going to go to MriyaReport.org, which is going to outfit some of our dudes, feed some of our soldiers, and all that stuff. So this is really, really good things. Back to our guest. Okay. Dan is got over 150 missions, combat missions. He's got more medals than a mineral mine, and perhaps has cheated death more times than a 9 lives afforded to a feline friend. So, Dan, I want to welcome you to our show. It's an honor to have you. I'm really, really proud to have flown your way in Allied Force. If there's anything that I said about you up front and got wrong, please correct me to 100%. By the way, but Dan, real quick before I go, I've tweeted out numerous times. Dan's got a really, really awesome book that's out there. I recommend you go get it. I believe it's available on Amazon, but I'll let him talk to that. Dan, you got the mic.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks. I would never claim to be the most decorated aviator, but you're making me blush. So anyway, happy to be here, and I'll happily answer any questions.
Awesome. Okay, so as we do on this Twitter space, MriyaReport's dedicated to providing true information about the war in Ukraine as well as counter-Russian propaganda. Many of our 60,000 followers and listeners are extremely interested in what's going on in the war, as well as how Russian propaganda is affecting them. As a nonprofit, MriyaReport is doing awesome stuff, helping out Chef Zenya feed soldiers, helping out mockers kit out some of the Ukrainian soldiers. And I won't leave out Zoe this time. Dan, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I've got a nonprofit going on called Sheltered Service, where we're taking shelter dogs from Eastern European nations. We're finding the right ones. We're getting them trained, and we're going to be sending them to disabled soldiers out of Ukraine. So this is really cool. Our test case is a dog named Zoe out of a Belarusian shelter, and she's knocking it out of the park. Her training's going well, and there's a video out available. So, Dan, all that being said, if you're ready, we're going to dish. My first question to you is about our time in Serbia, flying out of Aviano. You and I both flew as kind of air defense kind of experts per se, right? I flew EA-6Bs, you flew Vipers. The air defense system there was SA-3s, SA-6s, and a couple other different SAM systems, and basically knocking those down so that the West or NATO could gain air superiority was important, right? And those SAM systems are not the same ones that we look at today. But could you talk a little bit about how you roll back an integrated air defense system from the perspective of an F-16?
Yeah, and that's going to go down as one of yet another one of Russia's buffoonery, acts of buffoonery, is that they don't understand that, they never did it, and it's going to really bite them in the tail. As far as you and I go, whether it was in Europe or in the Middle East, you start out by knocking out the eyes. You take out the radars, either the fixed ones or the mobile ones, or all of them all at once. There's lots of different ways to do this. I've said many, many times that you don't have to be in an airplane to be a wild weasel, so to speak. I mean, anything that takes out a SAM or a SAM component qualifies as that. And I was always about using the best answer, whether that was a guy in a jet, or a special forces team with some satchel chargers, or even naval bombardment from off the coast. Whatever takes the radars down is what's important, because once they're blind, obviously they're limited, and then you can start taking them apart piece by piece where you need to.
Perfect. Yeah. So, and I agree, right? And whether it's HARMs, AGM-88s flying off of rails, or whether it's jammers, I don't know if it really matters. But the issue is, and as you said, right, that there's more to an air defense system, especially when it's integrated, than just the missile and the radar, right? You've got communications networks, you've got filter centers, you've got all these different things. This is why the United States had, Compass Call as an electronic attack asset in denying communications. As we move forward to, let's say, Ukraine, right? We've chatted just a little bit, right? And we know that there's something interesting. If you're a Western aviator like you and I, the war's been going on for a year, and you've still got third generation Frogfoots and fencers flying in S-300 and S-400 threat rings for over 365 days. When I think you and I probably had very, very similar briefings that if you fly in an S-300 and S-400, you're going to die. But Ukraine's still flying. So how do you assess the S-300 and the S-400? I realize they're formidable. I get it, but are they really the omnipresent, omnipotent weapon system that the West kind of built up?
No, they're not, and I never thought they were. I've flown with enough foreign air forces and been part of enough other types of operations, and I'm well aware of the limitations of Russian-made stuff. It doesn't mean I take it lightly, but it is as dangerous to overestimate a threat as it is to underestimate a threat. And we were always, as an F-16 Wild Weasel, we were always more of the teeth of the thing. We were going to go in and we were going to hard kill things. We used anti-radiation missiles and jamming and everything else. All of that's great. All of it's wonderful. But it was used with the idea that we're going to go in and we're going to kill these things. And because if they're scattered in little bits and pieces, they're suppressed, right? You don't have to worry about them the next day, right? So, the Navy has a little bit different philosophy about it than we do, but the end result is the same, is to try to eliminate these damn things. The long range stuff, it's nothing is a magic golden bullet, right? And there are ways to deceive and disrupt and destroy any surface to air missile system. So, the fact that you're seeing that sort of graphically illustrated in Ukraine right now doesn't really surprise me. Okay, so to answer your question, short answer is no, I'm not surprised.
All right, sounds good. So the $1 million question, right? That the question to all of our listeners who think you're phenomenal, and to be fair, 150 plus combat missions is quite impressive for a Viper. I've only got 1.2 missions, 1.2 hours over Nellis, which I love to death out of Wick. But unfortunately, I had to do a massive debrief, and I still failed to ride. But it's all good. You've come out in numerous different media outlets and said not only do you think that Vipers are the right answer to go into Ukraine, but there's some level of communications from you that said you're ready to strap on a Viper and go to Ukraine. Is that you just kind of pumping up your chest, or are you no kidding ready to go?
I lost all my chest pumping back when I went to the fighter weapons school, so I don't I don't do that anymore. No, it's a sincere offer, and you know they're excited about things like that. But as you and I both know, there's more to it than just giving them airplanes. And especially you're talking about some fine pilots. I mean, they've got some guys that have survived over there for a year, right? But there is a huge difference, getting back to what we just discussed, between Russian-made stuff and our equipment. And to go from flying a MiG-29 or a Su-27 into a modern Western fighter is a huge mental change from what they've been used to and what they've been trained for. Now, that isn't to say they can't do it. I'm sure they can, and I know that's being discussed. I think the Viper is the right answer for a lot of reasons. First of all, unlike some of the newer jets, it's been proven in combat. Not that the other ones can't, do their job, but there's something to be said for an airplane that's been all over the world in all sorts of different situations and come out, on top. Also, there's lots of different sources of F-16, so you're not limited to one particular country if it came to that. The other thing about the Viper that's so good is its versatility, right? So right now the Ukraine has several different airframes that they have to maintain, train on, handle all the logistics for. You know how all that works. If they had a Viper, they'd have one airplane that could do it all. It could do close air support, it could do defense suppression, it could do air-to-air. Okay, so they get a lot of versatility and a lot of bang for their buck, and it is an excellent transition aircraft for when they eventually join NATO and hopefully eventually get something like an F-35.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a huge fan of the Viper, and when I wrote my op-ed, my perspective was more not. I mean, you got to fly, right, and that's awesome. But my perspective was more from a logistics, National Defense University, ICAF perspective, where 4,500 of these things have been made, and if you have a maintenance team that's like 300 dudes per squadron, there's tens of thousands of guys out there around the world that have worked on Vipers, whether they be hydraulics guys, electronics guys, avionics dudes. You could put together relatively rapidly a CLS kind of construct, like we did with the Predator or the Reaper, right? MQ-1, MQ-9. So you could put together a privatized maintenance team, and then you're right. There's a pilot issue, right? So you've got to get the pilot trained. CQ Brown, who's now the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, has come out and said it's anywhere from 2 to 6 months. We've got the Undersecretary of Policy who's come out and said it's a year and a half. I think that's a little disingenuous. I would argue that, yeah, you could probably train a guy in a Viper if you took him off the street in a year and a half. But I don't think if you did a transition from a MiG-29, from a combat hardened, combat trained guy, that's going to take a year and a half. Do you see this? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm willing to.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong, and I think the Secretary of Policy or whatever he is should keep his pie hole shut, because he obviously isn't a pilot. CQ Brown, on the other hand, knows what he's talking about, and I made this point too, the same way that he did, was you get a MiG-29, a bright young MiG-29 pilot, with enough time to be proficient in that airplane. It could be done in considerably less time than a guy straight out of pilot training. But still, you're talking about time right now, and that's not something they really have. So what I had suggested way back when was, you get the airplanes, and then you get private military contractors to fly the airplanes who are already F-16 pilots. They're just not in the military anymore. Of course, that raises all sorts of political issues, and the State Department guys start wetting their pants and everything else. Politics aside, that's what I would do. I also suggested that in the interim, what they really needed to do, and I think I said this last year in the first week of the war, is to prevent Russian air superiority, you need to turn the airspace over the Ukraine into a, if it flies, it dies zone. And they really need surface-to-air missiles. They need not just the Patriots, but they need, newer things like the Marine, light Marine air defense system. There's also one called the Avenger that can handle drones and do all sorts of other things. And those things are just sitting, at least the Avenger is just sitting around in the United States. It's a mystery to me why those things haven't been set over there lock, stock, and barrel. So the pilot thing is something, at least Ukrainian guys to fly the F-16, they got to win the war first. Okay. And I don't know if there's enough time right now to start training their pilots to fly F-16s. They don't even have them yet. So, the commercial private military option, I think, is probably best for that in conjunction with surface-to-air missiles.
Yeah, it's almost like a mercenary Air Force. I'm completely in line with you, and it is getting late, right? And the longer we wait, and that this to be fair, I love the idea of actually trying to shut down the airspace over Ukraine, right? Because you want to have that layered defense construct of SAMs, not just Patriots. But it's a really weird air battle, especially, when you and I have studied for a very long time that one of the sides is going to gain air superiority. What we're seeing in this battle is almost like an air parity, where neither side's really tried to actually secure the airspace so the other one can't have it, and they're willing to cede that domain, and it's really strange.
No, you're right. The Russians are terrified of flying into the Ukraine, which is good. And the Ukrainians are trying to preserve what they have because they're not sure if they're going to get anything else. So both sides are not really being offensive like you and I are used to for different reasons.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Dan, Two Doctors, whatever you want me to call you, I'm good. Sir, it doesn't matter. We're gonna open it up to. All right, sounds good. We're gonna open it up to questions. I think our one of our listeners named Axel, who's also one of our co-hosts, has a question, so we're going to turn it over to him. Let me know if you can hear the audio. Axel, can you do a quick audio check for him?
1, 2, 3, mic check.
Do you hear that?
Yeah, it's faint, but I can hear him.
Okay.
All right.
Let's
go.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Axel.
Good afternoon, Dan. Great pleasure to have you here. In your book, you criticized once McNamara for his incrementalism. He coined a different term for it. Do you think that the same incrementalism is now the death of many Ukrainians, and is Mr. Sullivan the one to blame?
Well, that's a very good question. Completely different situations, right? I mean, in Vietnam, it was the United States engaged in a war. So, it's a little bit different than not being actively engaged in combat in this war. That said, I think that I would have hoped that somebody in our government would have realized, over a year ago, that this is not just about the war in the Ukraine. It's not an ideological struggle like the fiasco in Vietnam was. This is more concrete. I mean, this is Russia invading the West, and if they get away with it, where are they going to stop? Not to mention China and other countries around the world who are watching to see what happens to decide what they're going to do. So I think the U.S. government, once again, has failed to look ahead far enough into the future to realize what's important and do something about it.
Awesome. Axel, did you have a follow-up, or you
Sure.
good to go?
I could ask tons of questions, and we could talk about air battles, but I'm not going to do that now. I hope we all once gather in Ukraine after victory, and we can listen to war stories. But now focus on the approach now. If and when the maintenance issue could be solved, and if and when, as Jeff has, by the way, advocated here all the time, private efforts and pilots were going there. How would you structure it?
I'm sorry, Jeff. He broke up a little bit. I didn't quite get the last part of the question.
Yeah. So at the end, once Ukraine wins this, what do you see as the future?
Well, that's pretty straightforward. After they win, then they arrange however they want to select their pilots. to come initially to train in the United States. And then eventually they would take over training in country with their own facilities, like is being done, you know, in other NATO countries that have F-16s.
Perfect. And by the way, I wanted to point out to our listeners, when Axel says in his book, the name of that book is called Valor by Dan Hampton. It's a New York Times bestseller. He's also the author of Viper Pilot. But Valor, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, Valor is the new book that you have out right now, right?
Yeah, Valor came out last year. I think it's number 8. So I have another one releasing probably the end of this year or early next year.
Awesome. So, hey, you and I are going to have to talk about getting a publisher, because I got 3 books out right now and I still can't find a publisher. So you're going to have to give me some skinny to help you out on that, or help me out on that. So anyway, no, great. Hey, Axel, do we have any, Doc? I see Dr. Nikki Ford is there. Nick, did you have a question?
No, yes and no. I let somebody else see the floor. I'm not quite ready at this moment. So
okay, no worries.
just about to pull
Dr.
up
Nick,
George
Dr.
and
Nick
exit.
is probably doing surgery right now, so it's all right. George, go ahead. I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Thank you for coming on the space, Colonel. I asked one of our previous people that usually gets on here as a contributor, Colonel Jeff knows him Latin. But my question, I'm gonna pose it to you. What is the scenario now that we know that Ukraine, obviously, I think it was announced yesterday that there are Patriot missile batteries in Ukraine. I was going to ask you, do you have any idea, would they be able to move, let's say, 1 or 2 of those batteries toward the front? In other words, to push that surface-to-air envelope deeper behind enemy lines, their capabilities, so that way they could deny the Russians from maybe using their aircraft over the battle space, primarily the glide bombs that they've started using as of late. Is it feasible? Because you're the pilot.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, it's feasible. Those are mobile batteries. They could go anywhere. What the Ukrainians are going to do with them and what's been agreed to, I don't really know. I do know that the most effective way to deal with air defense is to layer it. So, you know, you've got your longer range stuff a little bit farther back so it's not as vulnerable. And then you've got the short range tactical systems that are right up front. Now, the Patriot's sort of in the middle there. It can do a lot of different things. But the whole idea is to negate the effect of Russian air, which, you know, I think they pretty much suck anyway. So there isn't that much negating to do. But if you can cause them to not want to fly over the battle space, if you cause them to jettison their bombs every time they get spiked, you know, you're winning. And I think they're quite, you know, rightfully afraid of the Patriot. As I said, though, we need to augment that with a lot of the shorter range, very cheap, very effective tactical systems that are available. And I wish the U.S. government would get off its collective tail and do it.
Yeah, and by the way, Dan, I wanted to piggyback on that. I completely agree. Right, I just did an interview with TRT World live on in the news in Turkey, and I was asked about the Patriot as if it's some kind of panacea, and it's a very capable system, but as Dan and I learned, layered air defense systems are important. When you have a Patriot missile that costs $3 million a shot, this isn't the missile you want to shoot at everything, right? You'd like to have some kind of layered system where you have more cost-effective missiles or air defense systems to go against things that you have a greater capability against. And it's yeah, I'd hate to imagine that Ukraine is going to shoot Patriot missiles at every single inbound drone, aircraft, or whatever coming in. When we talk about costs, I will tell you that that cost is going to add up much faster than sending a couple squadrons of F-16s in. Dan, you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I keep coming back to systems like the Avenger because, those things are plentiful, they're cheap, they're very effective, and they're very mobile. I mean, I think it sits in the back of a Humvee or, a Jeep or something. And it's perfect for moving around the battlefield now that the weather's drying out over there and the earth is getting hard again, so you can move wherever you want to. They're unpredictable if they're that mobile. The Patriot, is a mobile system, but they're still going to know where it is as soon as it, turns itself on, and that makes it vulnerable. The other systems kind of fill in the gaps, like you and I both know work very well.
Yeah, exactly. George, you said you have a quick follow-up?
Yes, guys. Thank you. Yeah, would it allow them to maybe now if they bring the Patriot near Kyiv, because we know that, well, obviously, I mean, we're not dumb. We know that NASAMS is obviously stationed somewhere around Kyiv, right? Would the Patriot going to Ukraine allow them maybe to move, let's say, an NASAMS or an IRIS-T unit to the front? Or maybe, some of the hot...
The Patriot... No, the Patriots' value is as material as it is psychological, right? It's going to intimidate and force the Russians, or at least it would force competent adversaries to rethink their strategy. What the Russians are going to do, who knows? But most people would have to adapt their tactics accordingly, and that's very important in a war. If you get the other person to react to what you're doing, instead of you reacting all the time to what they're doing. So just the very, by virtue of it being there, the Patriot's going to change some things.
Lexicon, go ahead with your question.
Okay, thank you. We're running our heads up against this wall all the time about how Ukraine, we've just been saying that Ukraine's not going to get anything like an F-16, any fourth generation thing. I think 2 nights ago, Colonel Jeff, we were asking about it, like, why? Does anybody know why? And you said, yes, I do. And you were basically gave us to understand Americans are just not going to let it happen, but that was hinged on some idea that there's NATO members who can't conceive of opening up to somebody else, like to Ukraine, these fourth generation fighters, except my impression is they're moving on to the 5th generation. So I guess that there's 2 things I want to understand, because yesterday people talked about a lot of movements going on among the Baltics or the Nordics or the Arctics, these countries that are coordinating their air forces, they're liberating F-6 or 4th generation planes. It's like there is some movement among those European NATO members. So there's 2 things that that I'd like to understand. Do we think really that there is any possibility the Europeans could get some fast jets to Ukraine? And then the other thing is about the air superiority. I mean, I don't want the Ukrainians to start now on the counteroffensive, because you can see they don't have enough stuff to get enough air competitiveness, or to get it to where they need to get it to be sure that they can win once they start this very broad and deep counteroffensive. So I'm asking about those 2 things. Is that too wide and too vague?
No. As far as what the Europeans will do, who knows? I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball. You can never really predict what the rest of Europe will do. I think that there is obviously a very high level of interest in the countries bordering Russia, like the Baltic states, especially Poland, Romania, countries like that. What they decide to do, is anybody's guess. I wouldn't write the US F-16s out of the equation yet, but that now you're getting into the realm of politics, not what is practical and makes sense from a military standpoint. And, good luck trying to figure out Washington. I mean, we have a president who won't even visit his own southern border. Why would he care about the Ukraine, right? I don't know. I can't answer that. I wouldn't say that they're off the table yet, and I would also take whatever you read in the press with a grain of salt. So we'll let it go at that. Now, the second part of your question was something to do with the counteroffensive
Well,
and F-16s, or just the
yeah, well, I
counteroffensive?
guess that it means that Ukraine really does have to wait to get more and more of what you've been describing, these layered air. If they're not going to get the fast jets, okay, they're going to fly what they've got, and then they need to receive in the field more and more of these mixed ranges of anti-air defenses in order to ensure that. I mean, otherwise, going ahead without the F-16s or something like it, and not having enough of the anti-air, and having like 2 precious Patriots that still have to protect Kiev and so on. So how could they even launch the counteroffensive if they don't get more in the way of anti-air defenses?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, and you're right. They're being stretched very, very thin. What the Ukraine has going for them is that they're very, very pissed off. Okay, and they really want their country back. They want their country unified, and so you're getting into a contest now between the supplies and equipment available to the Ukrainians and how long the Russians are going to put up with Putin and Putin's war. And again, I can't really guess on either one of those. I do believe that the Ukrainians will never give up, and if they have to attack with what they have to get their territory back, then they will.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and by the way, Dan, I completely agree with you. And the thing that if I was Russian, right? If I was a Russian and really thought that I even had a chance of securing some kind of ceasefire or peace, the insurgency that would follow from Ukraine would be paramount, right? I mean, the United States, what we experienced in the last 20 years as an insurgency and a counterinsurgency in Afghanistan would almost be, child's play to what I think the Ukrainians would levy upon on Russia. So that whether they win now or they win later, they're just going to win.
No, I agree too, and the Russians are very patient people. I mean, come on, chess is the national game, right? But they're also not very imaginative tactically. So right now, both sides are kind of playing the time game. The Russians are betting that the West will become disinterested and let them do what they want to with the Ukraine, like we saw in 2014. The Ukrainians are hoping that there's going to be enough common sense left in Russia that somebody takes Adolf Putin out and ends their problems. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I agree with you. I don't think the Ukrainians are ever going to give up.
Yeah, fair point. Hey, we are at 19:32. I know you told me you promised me 30 minutes. I do have one more hand up. Do you want to take that, or do you want to press?
Yeah, I can go till 40 after, and then I got to scoot.
Okay, so Goldman, go. You go quick.
Hey, thanks for joining us. Quick question. When I read the letter of when DOD sent 8 senators, a letter saying why it was so hard to give F-16s to Ukraine. It was a bunch of excuses, but one thing caught my attention was that when the letter said that no matter where they were coming from, there'd be an 18-month mod period required before they got the country. And as an engineer, that kind of surprised me that no matter what the source, it would take 18 months of mod to get them to Ukraine. And that kind of told me that there are some systems in those aircraft that are out there that were unwilling to give Ukraine, and they need to be demodded out of those aircraft. If for instance, someone else, the Dutch gave F-16s or whatever. Do you have any idea what's your impression of that statement, and what systems might that be that need to be taken out of the aircraft before we give them over? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, my impression is that statement is basically crap. It's political doublespeak is what it is. All right, I have gone from the East Coast of the United States to an air base in the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia in 14 hours direct. Okay, so equipment aside, we can move stuff faster all over the world than any other nation, any other military that there is. I mean, a perfect example is the Army unit that's over there now. I was where they left from, and I watched them leave. And within a matter of a few days, they're on the ground in Eastern Europe. So it's a matter of willpower. As far as the equipment goes, that's going to be determined by where the F-16s come from and what block of F-16s there are, because they all have different equipment in them. And if it was something that the U.S. decided was in their national interests to provide, it could be done in record time, faster than most people would believe. But the problem right now is a lack of political will, and I'm going to go ahead and blame that again on Washington, D.C., because that's where the problem lies.
Yeah, and Goldman, we've
excuse.
talked about this, right? I mean, one of the Dan, you're 100% correct. I often joke on the Twitter space where I say, if Joe Biden woke up one day and he just went to his chief of staff and said, "Hey, ship me a plan that puts 48 F-16s in Ukraine in under a week," DOD would respond, and there'd be a plan. I mean, no one's going to go to him and say, boss, that just can't happen. No one says that, right?
No, it can happen. I mean, there are F-16s, whether they're U.S. or other F-16s, that are available. It's a matter of political will,
Right.
not military capability or logistics.
Yeah, it's not an operational issue. All right, perfect. All right, Goldman, did you have a follow-up, or are you done?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
All right, perfect. And we got one more question. I think we're going to make the time frame. So, Gunny, holy shit. Hey, be careful, Gunny. Gunny's a Brit, and he's one of these sailor type of guys, one of these water dudes. So be careful.
Hey, don't pick on me.
Love Brits, no problem.
Ignore him, mate. Colonel Jeff just doesn't like me. I think it's a personal thing. Mate, good briefing. Really interesting, especially if you're an air defense nerd. Two quick questions. First of all, Russian air defense overall, bad equipment, bad training, or actually pretty good equipment and a damning indictment of short service conscription, i.e. the best kit in the world doesn't really work if you put a chimpanzee in front of it. And secondly, given the what we're seeing is a massive use of uncrewed aerial vehicles to try and complicate the comprehensive air picture, do you think there's an argument here for reversion back to really old school and batteries of systems like 4060, 4070 Bofors, something like that? Not necessarily radar laid preferably, but thermals, good optics, and allocating these to key targets so that the surface to air missiles, the really expensive shiny kit, can go after the really dangerous inbound tracks, and you can use your gun batteries for engaging the slower stuff, which is still dangerous. Obviously, if it hits a house, it's going to kill people, but in the grand scheme of things, you want to allocate cheaper systems to, because I think one of the lessons from this is the massively high expenditure of surface to air missiles that we could see. In the next war, we might be inundated with them. So do you think cheaper options like Bofors, etc., are going to be the way ahead?
Yeah, no, I think you kind of hit it on the head. The older systems are definitely still very lethal. I mean, given the choice of facing an SA-8 or a high rate of fire, Zeus or 60 millimeter battery, they're all very lethal. So they can all be used accordingly. And I think right now the Ukrainians need anything that they can get. The good thing about those old Russian systems is they made an awful lot of them, and there's still an awful lot of them around. So I'm sure the Ukrainians are making the best use of them that they can. As far as the Russians themselves, I would put their equipment into the pretty good category, with the caveat that, I mean, even a blind pig can find a truffle once in a while. And they do every now and again come up with something surprising that you have to take into account. But by and large, I mean, we used to call the Russians cabbage heads, because they don't think the way we do. They don't fight the way we do. They're very good defensively, but on the offense, they've always been very, very limited. And everybody's been surprised about the way the war's gone in the Ukraine, but those of us who have known and fought and trained against the Russians, we're not surprised, because they don't do this well. They don't react to changing tactical situations very well. So yeah, I think again, you can't overestimate, or you can't underestimate them, but you also can't overestimate them. And with, you know, if this was being fought by a Western military against the Russians, you know, this war would very likely have already been over, because we do things so much different. I'm not criticizing the Ukrainians. I'm just saying you've got two groups of people using the same equipment that were basically trained the same way, and now they're fighting each other. So, you know, what do you expect's going to happen, right?
Gunny, follow up.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, just something like the Moskva. I think even though she was pretty old, I think if you'd put a Western operations crew in there, and all her systems had been up, and they'd had an AWACS, even if she was MCON silent, so she wasn't transmitting, with an AWACS back, providing her an air picture, and a properly manned electronic warfare desk, she wouldn't have got sunk. I think, as I said, I think this is a damning indictment of what happens if you go down the road of 12, 18 months maximum people. It doesn't matter how good the equipment is. You really need professionals in there. And just reference the gun systems and things. I'm just really hoping that we're going to see a reversion. I think in 1982, down the Falklands, the writing was on the wall then. We sort of took that lesson in about the necessity for short-range, rapid-firing gun systems. We got our asses spanked over that because no one thought that you'd need something like a 20mm or a 30mm again. And then we've slowly been kind of reverting back. And I think now suddenly it becomes apparent that there is still a place for a gunner on a mount with a good optical system on a fast-firing gun. And of course, if it's mobile, you can use it for other stuff like shooting at idiot mubbicks as well, can't you, if it's quiet?
Yeah, and you know, I always am careful and wary of the people who say always and never. You know, like the people who said jet fighters would never need a gun again. You know, you'll never go and you'll strafe again. You'll never do this. You'll never do that. Well, that's crap. Okay, and this war has plainly shown that for those who didn't know it, and it's a warning. I hope to us in the West, and particularly the United States, who seem to get enamored with technology, which is fine, but you have to account for the other end of things, which is what you're saying. And it's, you know, it's very deadly. It's a very real threat. And unfortunately, that kind of low tech stuff is what the Russians actually do very well. So, you know, it's a conundrum, all right. And, you know, let's just hope for the best.
Yeah. I'm a big fan, Dan, of saying never say never, because I'm fairly certain that I want to have you back on our show at some point. So I'm never gonna say never that you're gonna be back, and I'm never gonna say never that you might find some way to be on Twitter. Who knows? We have lots of opportunity. Gunny, thanks for the question. To my audience that's listening in, this has been phenomenal. Dan, I just want to let you know, we're over 450 people who actually listened in. You know, again, 60,000 people. This is eventually be recorded and then put on Spotify. So I'll let you go ahead and push it out. It was a pleasure to have you on here. I really, really do appreciate it. Again, Dan's book out there right now is called Valor. He's got another one coming out, but it's on a New York Times bestseller. Also, Viper Pilot. Go out there and look. I'm sure it's on Amazon. It's probably right next to mine. I'm not sure if it's doing as good as mine. Actually, that's a lie. It's probably doing far better than mine, but that's all right. Self-publishing is a bit son of a bitch, but that's all right. Anyway, Dan, I'm going to give you the last word. I truly appreciate you coming on. The floor is yours.
No, my pleasure. I'm happy to come back anytime you want, Fish, or help out with any of your with any of your other endeavors. If anybody wants to contact me, my publisher makes me keep a Facebook page. You can get me that way. If you're going to troll me, don't bother, because I'll just block you and never hear from you again. But if you want to talk about something or have a question, by all means, let me know.
Hey, can you go ahead and share what that Facebook space is so that people know?
Oh, I think it's called Dan Hampton Author or something like that. I was never a big Facebook guy, but I have to admit that it allows me to keep in contact with people and people who have, you know, interesting questions and want to chat. It may take me a while because I'm gone a lot, but I will eventually respond.
Awesome. Sounds good. Hey, for those who follow the Dish with Fish weekly, next week is 4-star General Breedlove. Hey Dan, what did you say General Breedlove's call sign is?
Guana. Yeah, get him
Perfect.
to explain that one, okay?
He will not explain. He's a 4-star. He's a diplomat now. He won't explain it. That's fine. But anyway, Dan, it was a pleasure to have you again. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. He and I have a very good mutual friend named Stormin Norman, so you can ask him about Stormin too.
I know Stormin, and I also know Sea Lion. I know all those guys. It's awesome. It's like old home week with you. We need to drink beers and hang out. I think we know each other far better than we lead on. Anyway, to my audience, it was wonderful to hang out with you guys. I hope you appreciated the special edition. Dan, it was a pleasure to have you. I'm turning it back over to Axel and the team, so I'm signing out.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Much appreciated. See you soon again. Let's win this. All right, gentle people, that was an excellent session. Thank you very much to Jeff and bringing us yet another excellent guest. Gunny, did you hear this? That essentially the rollback option is pretty much what General Ben Hodges just shot out earlier today, yet again, that unless we push back and give them long-range missile capability, we can't put the Russians on their back foot quick enough. Yes, of course, layered defense and whatnot, but still.
I think they've got it already. They're just not deploying it yet. I mean, why would you? Look, and there's a couple of things that will happen. Either stuff is going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, and the Ukrainians are going to go on a defensive posture somewhere, maybe because there is a very substantial Russian offensive coming. Can't see it. I really don't see that at all. Or this is going to be a one shot. If this a major offensive doesn't work out, the Ukrainians will have to go to the negotiating table at some stage. Yeah, they'll be able to keep fighting. Obviously, the Russians aren't going to do some riposte and march gloriously into the center of Kyiv. But if they get it wrong, it's going to really, really throw them, and it's going to lead to an outcome that none of us want. Therefore, they're going to chuck everything into this. They're going to need to do so many. They're going to need to do a sort of 1991-2003 kind of strike. They're going to have to absolutely strip and hammer Russian command and control, logistics, marshalling areas, logistics junctions, dumps, units that maybe are hanging back for counterattacks. They're going to have to hammer fortifications. They're going to have to absolutely smash anything that looks like it's any kind of threat. And they're going to have to just keep pushing and hopefully cause a sequential collapse. Therefore, why would they start using all the gizmos that they've got right now?
Of course not. No, I'm not saying that they should be doing it right now. I'm just saying the public discussion as to whether to give it to them and whether they would have it. That, well, we could always go for strategic ambiguity. I don't mind it. I'm completely fine with it. But the fact that it has been always said, publicly stated, that they should not have them out of fear, I think that part of the discussion could change, could it not?
Well, okay, Axel. You're Ukraine, I'm the States, right? And we're sat in a room, and you want ATACMS, right? And I say, yep, cool. But then we go to a press conference, and we announce that you've got ATACMS. Cat's out of the bag, isn't it? Isn't it better?
No. I think the tone should change. No, the tone should change in the States to say we will be providing everything Ukraine needs. Period. Not saying what it needs and what it gets. Take the Finnish road. It's in the middle.
No, I don't think everyone needs to know what you're delivering. Why would they?
So just Finland also doesn't do it. Finland doesn't say. They don't say. They just say they'll get what they need. Period. And then they walk off the podium. But what they do say is Ukraine must win.
Well, the Italians send M109s, and they don't make a song and dance about it. And the only reason that we know that a fresh delivery is because a freight train gets hung up at a commuter station, and suddenly people are looking at M109s on the back. What would I do? So you ask me for ATACMS, I say, yeah, cool, of course you can. But I tell you what, let's not make it public. Well, why not? Well, what's the point? What's the point of telegraphing that you've got all these capabilities? Surely it's better for the OPFOR not to know that you've got these capabilities. Oh, we'll come out and we'll say you can't have these capabilities because it potentially it might create a wider conflict, and we'll cook up loads of ideas like we did with the Bradleys and maybe like the F-16 program that's going on now. But why would I telegraph to the world what I'm giving you? There is no need for the Twitterati to know exactly what capabilities have been given to Ukraine. The Twitterati will cream themselves on the day when all these wonderful bits of equipment are suddenly getting used, and then everyone will slap their foreheads, I think, and go, oh, of course. But I keep saying it, and I know I sound like a broken record, Axel, but ladies and gentlemen, you are not entitled to know what the Ukrainians are getting, right? You're part of the information war. What you hear and what you see is invariably what you're meant to see. You're told these things because you need to know these things. But what you aren't seeing is what's actually going on. UK said we're going to give long range strike capability. Anyone seen a mention of a Storm Shadow? Anyone? No. Well, we weren't talking about Brimstone, and we weren't
We
talking
haven't heard
about
anything about the
M270.
Storm Shadow, despite the fact that we pretty much are certain that it's there.
Exactly. And that's probably going to be the same for a lot of equipment. None of us has got eyes on a mechanized brigade marshalling point in deep Ukraine. None of us knows what is happening behind the lines, because Ukrainian, and I've got to say NATO, OPSEC has been pretty drum tight on this. There's equipment suddenly turning up in Ukraine. Is anyone seeing this stuff rolling across Europe, filmed by thousands of people? How is it even getting there? Did anyone see the Challengers appear in Ukraine? Anyone in Romania see a train full of Charlie 2s? Anyone in Poland? No one. So this kit is moving. The OPSEC is drum tight. You're seeing what you're meant to see, and I would just counsel waiting for the off. I mean, I think you're going to see the Ukrainians have been given a lot of capabilities that nobody even guessed at, and fine. I'm perfectly happy with that. And to be honest, all of this stuff that comes out of certain organisations about unnecessary escalation, and we're not prepared to take that enormous step so far. That's entirely what I would expect these organisations to say. Maybe it's true, and there's a lot of spineless jellybacks in the West, and nobody, there's a lot of fear about giving Ukrainians certain capabilities. But let's face it, this is the best opportunity to cut the gonads off the Russians that we've had since time immemorial. And I really don't think NATO are going to pass this opportunity up, because the next big fight is bubbling away on the horizon out in the Far East. So I think NATO have got a vested interest in squaring this one away, and then we can pivot and then start looking over to the Pacific, where our attention is going to be required next.
Well, hold it for that. Jeff, you're back. That's great. Let's hear it.
Dude, that was awesome. Come on, that was awesome.
Absolutely. 2 dogs. Actually, in this case, it was 3 dogs.
That guy slept more in an F-16 than I probably slept in combat, which is phenomenal, right? I mean, you put it on autopilot, you take a little nap, and then you have the deedle come on when you get close to it. But I mean, literally, what is really nice for, I think, all of us is what we've talked about and kind of the positions we've taken, and not being F-16 experts and not being the guy who's literally flown, fought, and win. But I mean, dude, this guy went toe to toe with SA-6s, SA-8s, SA-3s, and won more time. I mean, he's credited with like destroying over 20 surface air missile systems. So, I mean, what we've been saying resonated with him, and he says we're right. So, those in the audience, you feel like you've somehow like been told, well, you're not an F-16 expert. What do you know? Well, dude, you need to bow up your chest, because you just heard from one, and that's awesome.
Yeah, well done, and I'm so glad that you have been so persistent in getting him on. I know it was
Axel,
difficult, but
I have
it
a
was
question
really.
for Colonel Jeff.
Yes, give me a sec. I was just highlighting. I was praising Colonel Jeff's stoicism
Colonel,
in
can you
this
hear me,
case.
or am I like?
Sorry, what? George?
I think George needs to recycle.
Yeah, I think he did.
George, because Axel was talking.
Oh shit. Okay.
No worries.
Not a problem. Thank you, Dr. Nick. Much appreciated. Always glad to have you here. Jeff, I think sometimes one has to be persistent, but as you highlighted, he has been in that seat for such a long time and in such various different shapes and forms. And from what I read, when I read his Viper book some time ago, and then re-listened to it on Audible, it's actually quite funky if you think about it. Because his father was flying planes, he's been up in the air as long as he can think. And he's always been going after, I want to fly, I want to do this. And when he then he switched from architecture to qualifying for pilot, for a pilot seat, which then took a long time, of course, as always. He's always been dedicated to doing the impossible, meaning fighting against the others. That obviously requires a certain character, that requires a certain obsessiveness. But at the same time, it provides you with clarity because you've been facing death. And that changes the calculus. I think we heard it here today. So thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And to be fair, that I don't know Two Dogs all that well, right? I mean, I just met him. We just had a chat, but there's this character trait that runs deep in aviators that I appreciate, right? And there's many aviators in the Air Force, and the ones that I truly gravitate to, the ones that I think that are, that they make colonel, and to be fair, it's a trait that really makes it hard to stay friends. Is this trait where it's if someone tells me I can't do something, I'm going to do it. Right. I mean, if it was my dad that told me I couldn't do it, I'm going to do it. If it was, my professor that told me if you asked me to do something, you got a 50-50 chance I'm going to do it. If you told me I couldn't do it, whether it was athletics, because I actually swam in college, I swam for Indiana University my freshman year. I was a state finalist in swimming in Indiana. Look, if someone tells me I can't do something, I'm going to do it. And he's the same way, right? I mean, you read his book and he's like, yeah, Two Dogs, your dad flew, but maybe you're not the right guy. You should be an architect. He's like, all right, if that's what you think, I'm going to go do it. Right. And it's a trait that's existed among many of my friends. It's always hard because when we get together and there's some drinking involved, someone makes a statement that's a challenge that ends up being a little bit too far, but we try and reel it back in.
Eerily familiar. And especially the trait, if somebody says, oh, that's impossible. You can't do it. This is not just a challenge. This is everything. I think he fits the Ukrainians quite well, and he gets them. And you heard it right at the beginning. They'll fight no matter what.
I agree. You said that someone I heard someone had a question out there, so I'm going to turn it over. So
it was George, but George is about to recycle. I don't know where we have him at the moment.
Okay. Hey, Dr. Nick, I'm sorry that I never got back to your question. I feel bad.
No, don't worry about it. I was multitasking and I was trying to figure out exactly how to formulate it. It was just something related more to like Poland, and I could never quite figure out exactly how I wanted to word it. So it's totally fine. He got plenty of questions out there, but it was kind of, I guess, related to the notion, and a few people kind of brought this up in different ways, is it possible that Poland or some other place, might try to figure out some way to get something there, because they keep talking about it. And so that makes me kind of think that, they're trying to find ways to make something happen. So
what do you mean?
I just was
something what?
Like something related to the planes, getting them over there.
Well, the MiGs are getting over there, but the Poles have actually no wherewithal in giving anything else.
Right. Well, some of them I've heard from a few politicians, something related to that at least that Ukrainians should be getting F-16s.
Yeah,
So, and I know
Norwegians,
that
Danish, and
right.
Dutch. Those are
Mhm.
the ones which are under discussion in the European theater. But as both Jeff and Dan and everybody else has said thus far, my European cousins here are changing their opinions and their commitments like other people have to change diapers.
Right. Right. Sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, like I said, hadn't quite formulated the question in my head, and it still isn't totally formulated because I'm quite honestly I'm like doing 50 things right now. But it was just something in related to that, in a general sort of
And
way.
we would love to see, by the way, depot level maintenance. You could happily do in Romania, and you could happily do this in Slovakia, where there's very good capabilities, and in Poland. Of course, that's where you should do it.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. It's closer to, the battle itself. So, anything that needs to be done could be drug across that line. So that would make more sense as far as maintenance and all of that. But anyway, I'll just sort of step back and go back to what I was doing and sort of listen in the background. Feel free to drop me if you need more space.
No, stay with us. Don't run away. And by the way, you still owe
Okay.
us. You still owe us a little segment on the conference and tell us what you did there. But
Yeah, let me know when you want to hear about it.
Let's talk on line 99 and then we'll set it up. In the meantime, let's go to Mockers. He had a question.
Yes, George is waving at you from the wings somewhere. He says you just can't see him.
I did see him before you said anything, but whenever I pressed the button, nothing happened. Let's try this again. Because I believe that he had a question for Jeff. Fly, eagle, fly. George, can you hear us? You know what, Jeff? It seems to me that your combination with the Zoom audio has been better than what we're experiencing with George at the moment. George, can you hear us now?
He's getting closer.
He was lifting his hand at least. I don't know what he's doing, but George, maybe you want to type out your question or send a messenger. We do take stone plates at the front entry of at the porter house at the gate. People do translate Egyptian hieroglyphs into appropriate language. Okay, he's off to the stonemason now.
Keep an eye out for an incoming pigeon.
Incoming pigeons are typically taken down here by our anti-air defense around the estate, but okay. George. Does anybody hear George?
No.
Right.
No.
Excellent. So I'm not alone. This is becoming a running joke. It's like who's on first and what's on second? In the meantime, Dr. Nick, whilst we are waiting for George to come up, and he has equal problems as August. I'm trying to cycle up August and can't even retrieve her, which is even worse than anything. Let's try George. George, are you with us now?
I believe so. So I had a colonel. I had a colonel. I had a question for Colonel Jeff.
I had one too.
Yeah, yeah, you do. I don't have a colonel, but anyway. Okay. In July of 2022, the U.S. Congress passed the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act. Now, in that act, there was a bunch of different procurements and things that money was assigned to certain things. There was $100 million. $100 million. And that was supposed to be dedicated to training Ukrainian pilots on US aircraft. We are now almost at the end of April. Has anybody heard anything? Or as Gunny has been saying, we're not supposed to hear of anything. And I'm
No,
just
we
reminding you,
did hear something about it, George. We heard in November last year that supposedly that title of the budget had not been used.
well, yeah, well, in November it's supposed to be for 2023. It wouldn't have been used back in November. It's supposed to be for this
No,
year.
it was not a title for 2023. It was a title for as of immediate. But that doesn't mean that they haven't done anything in 2023.
No, I'm just wondering because that's $100 million just sitting there saying, use me, Obi-Wan, use me. Any ideas, Colonel?
Yeah, so I think we need to be a little careful, right? Like when there's $100,000 or $100 million that just kind of sits out there, it's not like a bank account where people it's like an ATM that can go draw on, right? So even though funds are allocated and authorized, right? So there's the authorizers and the approvers, right? So once that happens, then there's a green visor guy in Washington who basically validates some level of expenditure, right? Executing the funds in the budget. And to be fair, there are billions of dollars in the budget every year that go unexecuted, right? And whether it's this line or any other line, it's the guys with the green visors will reach back into the Pentagon and say, hey, I'm looking at this program, the F-22 program. You said that you want to execute another $500 million this year. There's no way. I've talked to the program office. They might be able to execute 480. There's $20 million sitting on the table. What do you want to do with it, right? So at that point, there's a whole discussion of what to do with the money. Where do you move it around? What do you do? Blah, 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 this and that. So although look, I get it. The NDA says there's money in there, and that's awesome. This is really, really true. Wonderful, right? And there's obviously, if it's in the NDA, then the appropriators and the authorizers both came together and said, hey, put this money in there. What we now need to do is we now need to go to the executors and the budgeting guys and say, okay, has there been any level of effort put forward towards executing these funds to figure out where we're at? And I don't know I don't know that answer.
Yep, it's just interesting that money was allocated and we haven't heard much.
Yeah, George, do you know what else is interesting?
A lot, but go ahead, remind me.
My fiction thriller series about Kurt Nover. I have 3 books out, and my 3rd one just came out like literally yesterday, and I couldn't be happier. So
You write books?
Those are my Maria. And I'll tell you, I did announce yesterday that all the purchases of Live Range that come out over the next 7 days are going to be 100% of my proceeds are going to go to MriyaReport.org. So all the money I make, it's going straight in. But people don't realize I have the ability to look at my Amazon sales broken out by book, and I'll tell you right now there's only 6, and I think we can do better than 6. So I'm watching you people, right? It's the My Cousin Vinny. I'm watching you, or whatever the show is. So hopefully we can get some more money going to MriyaReport.org.
August. And please don't say September when you come up. No, she went. What is it with these people? What is going on today?
Hey,
Hello, August. Good afternoon.
Hey, hi. Hey, Alex. Two Dog was talking about, the quickest.
who keeps turning? Can you stop? Can you stop turning off?